Hello and welcome to my latest video. In this video we're going to be continuing the painting of this Stormcast Eternal special character, and more specifically we're going to be looking at her cloak and the filigree upon it. Don't worry too much about the background colour. It's just a simple case of I've used some Portugal Galvaback red on black background, added a bit of white to it through a few transitions, and then glazed over it Evil Sunz red. You could just paint it red, it doesn't matter too much because we're going to be working with glazes on top of it anyway. So you can see I'd already started some filigree there, and that will also be worked over the top of. So to start with, we're using heavy Goldbrown, which is a Vallejo game extra opaque colour. Which makes it quite nice because it gives stronger marks. It has more pigment in it. So what you're going to see quite a lot in this video is me spending ages painting these swirly patterns. The biggest issue with doing these patterns is just making them all work together as one piece, because I'm going to cover the entire cloak in it, which is a slight issue for the part that I did in the corner there, that's already a few steps along towards being finished, because that was like a quick test piece that I then have to work into the rest of the design. Now generally for this sort of thing it's a good idea to draw out a design first, or look for one to copy on the internet or something like that, but I'm just completely making it up as I go along. Which isn't a terrible thing, but it does mean that you can get stuck in areas and you don't know what sort of shapes to paint on. And the other thing is that it obviously isn't going to be symmetrical. I want it to be quite flowing and organic. In hindsight, it probably would have been easy to make the design symmetrical, because then at least you know what you're doing on the other side once you've painted one side anyway. But in this case I just decided to do random designs all over. You can see as I was painting that swirl there that I started off with quite a thin line, and then I've worked over the top of it to make it thicker. Now it doesn't look as elegant or refined being thick like this, but the reason that I'm making it thicker is because later on I'll be adding glazes on top of this over the whole cloak, and that will really pull back these colours and make them much less vibrant, and then I'll be working on top of them again. So it's a multi-layer process. Excuse me. One of the other big issues that you'll find when painting on cloaks and things like that, very uneven surfaces, is it's very hard to get a smooth straight line when you're going over such uneven surfaces, and that's just something you have to practice on. Generally what happens is that you have to do you take your time more, you do much thinner lines and then you work on top of them, but also there's a strong chance that you're going to still make the line look a little bit jagged or uneven, and in that case you just have to keep tidying it up using a base colour. And that's why I said don't be too concerned about the base red that I put on there. It's very quick and roughly done, and you just need like a few layers, a few transitions on there quickly. It's not really important. You could even just start off as a plain flat red, because as I say, the glazing on top of it will add shadows and things. What you're also going to find in this corner here that I'm painting is towards the end of the video, you may have noticed this for those of you that follow my Patreon, sorry not Patreon, my Instagram, is that it doesn't look like this at the end. I decided I didn't like this design at all and just rubbed it out. And I rubbed it out using the Galvaback red paint. Now that might seem a bit odd, because obviously the Evil Sunz Scarlet has been glazed on top, so some more vibrant red, but we're going to be glazing the Evil Sunz Scarlet later on anyway, and the Galvaback Red is quite a dark colour, and actually it covers the paint mistakes much better than the Evil Sunz Scarlet. If you put Evil Sunz Scarlet down to cover up any mistakes, what you'll find is that it's a very vibrant red and it stands out loads, and it's much harder to blend in with the glazes later on. And because the red that's already on there is not very bright, because as I said, the Evil Sunz Scarlet that's on there was only glazed on, it's mainly Galvaback Red that you can see. So going back to the design that I'm painting at the moment, it looks very rough and unrefined, as you can see. But even though it is rough and unrefined, it's still actually quite tricky to paint. You can see it at the moment in the bottom right hand corner of the video. My head is just starting to poke in to the scene, and that's because I have to get really close so that I can see exactly what I'm doing on this kind of painting. Because usually for this kind of detail, I'd have the model really close to me so I can see each tiny mark. It's still further away from me than I'd like, but for the purposes of recording the video, I have to have it in a position so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm actually using quite a small brush for this as well. It's a size 30. It's actually a Rosemary & Co brush, this one. But I do swap between two brushes because they're roughly the same size, which is odd because one's a 30 and one's a 20. But you kind of find once you get to that sort of small size that it doesn't make a big difference. They both have good points. You don't need the brush to be that small really, but it just helps a little bit in case you push a bit too hard in some places and make a really fat mark on the model. So an important thing to note when painting these marks on is that they all have to flow together. And that's kind of hard to work with because you have to keep putting all these shapes in. Now the reason I changed this bottom right hand corner is because I put too many lines. Now it may have been the case that if I just carried on, glazed these down and added more lighting effects and things to the gold filigree look, it would have turned out alright, but I didn't want to go through the whole video and then decide at the end that I didn't like it, so I thought it'd be better. It's probably about halfway through the video, I think, before I decided to wipe it out and change it, but you'll see that as we get to it. You can see as I apply the marks, they're constant small marks that overlap each other to build up to a stronger line. And doing that, you can also do much. You find it much easier to fade out a line. So instead of just doing one long line and slowly taking the brush off, if you do a very fine line and then keep building it up, it'll look more like a transition. You have that little bit more control over it. Every now and then you might see me with the brush that I rotate the brush, and that's because when I apply the paint, you rotate the brush a little bit as you apply the paint to it, but then again as I rub it on my thumb or whatever I happen to rub it on to take the thick of the paint off, it does tend to flatten one side of the brush a little bit, and if I rotate it so that I'm looking at the thin edge of the brush when I apply, you get a finer line. So you can still see at this stage it looks very unrefined. You can see little jagged marks on that line that I put in there as well. So what happened there was I paused the video while I moved the model closer to me, and I used the Galvaback red just to neaten it up a little bit, because I wasn't happy with the lines and that curl there. There will be stages later on where you can see me applying the Galvaback red to older things live on the video. It just happened to be in that case I was particularly frustrated with it. So another thing to note with this kind of painting is it is very laborious. It'll take you quite a long time, mainly because you have to be quite neat and you have to consider how you're doing the patterns. And that's one of the benefits of if you have pre-drawn your pattern or are copying a pattern, you don't have to spend quite as much time. So if you just want to reproduce a pattern that you've seen someone else paint, or that's on some, you get filigree on all sorts of things on the corners of paintings or anywhere. But if you just want to copy something, you'll have a much easier time than trying to make it up as you go along. And for those interested, all filigree is just fancy design work. There's no specific shape or anything, although curves and things like that tend to be in it. What you might notice in these curls that I'm doing is making the centre of each curl a slight blob. It just makes the curl more interesting to the finishing in a sharp point. It turns into almost a raindrop shape. There on the palette you can see the Galvaback red. It looks very dark on the palette there, and you'll see here as I'm applying it, it looks dark as well. It doesn't have the best coverage, so you might find that you need to do a few coats with it if you want to take away something quite large. But if you're just neatening up edges, things like that, it works fine. So hopefully you can see, and I'm kind of achieving, is that all these lines sort of flow into each other. But of course within these flowing lines you still have to get these interesting shapes. But as I said, at this bottom right hand corner. I'm not happy with any of these parallel, or almost parallel kind of marks coming off of that curl. So that'll all change. It's important not to be afraid to alter things when you're painting as well. You might think, well, I've taken ages doing that and it was really hard, but if it doesn't look very good, there's no point in keeping it. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using the Vallejo Game Colour Extra Opaque Heavy Goldbrown. It's particularly good for this sort of thing, especially painting on a dark background. It can be tricky to make a light colour like this sort of yellowy colour on top of a dark background. Yellows in general, not very good coverage. The Extra Opaque really helps with that. It's not a proper yellow, as you can see, it's yellowy brown, but it's close. It works actually really well for a gold colour, and I didn't want the gold on the cloak to be the same colour as the gold on the armour, because as this is kind of a stitching fabric type colour, I didn't just want it to be a straight copy. That's why the colours are completely different. For those interested on the palette, the other colours besides the heavy gold brown and the Galvaback red are Vallejo Model Colour Ice Yellow and Citadel Ceramite White. Neither the white or the ice yellow will be used until quite a bit later in the video. So really just the main colour of the heavy gold brown does all of the major work in this. And then the other colours just help bring it to life, make it smoother and interesting things like that. Little spots of light. You can see again there I use the Galvaback red to just neaten up the little curls coming out there. Anyone who has the model might note that on the original piece, in both corners of the cloak, there are little sculpted on details, and those have all been cut off and sanded down to allow me to paint these details on freehand. So just in case you are following along and trying to copy, make sure you cut those bits off first. One sad thing is that when you have finished painting this, then you apply the cloak to the model. It's actually quite hard to see all these details that you're painting on. They are still visible if you get down close and look at it, and if you look at it from certain angles and things like that. But it's not really suitable for tabletop gaming. I mean, it takes a long time anyway to paint all these filigree things, and then you can't see it unless you look closely at this particular model anyway on the inside of the cloak. So unless you're doing this for display or to practice your painting or things like that, I wouldn't bother with it too much for gaming standard stuff. Or rather, if you do want to do this kind of thing for gaming standard, just stick with using the heavy Goldbrown. It looks okay. It pops out much more being a strong bright colour on the dark background, and you might be able to see it on the tabletop that way. So at the moment, in the bottom right, it looks a little bit like flames and fireworks. That's what I was doing there. I've got a bit of dried paint on the tip of the brush. You might find you get that yourself with these continue marks. And instead of messing about with that, I just swap my brush instead. So the brush looks quite similar, but it's actually different. So you can't see it too well in the video there, but on one of the highlight lines on the red cloak, I actually caught the side of the brush as I was going down, and it's something that's so easy to do when painting on such an extreme curved surface. And you really need to just use the tip of the brush for all of this work, because as soon as you catch the edge of it, it will leave a smeared mark. So yeah, you have to really pay attention, because you need to really, ideally, you want the same pressure on all the surfaces of the model as you go around. And of course, as the distance between the surface changes between the brush and your hand, sorry, the model in your hand, because obviously it goes up and down, you have to move your hand further and nearer. It's very hard to keep it perfect, and you just end up making slight mistakes. So really just take your time, and again, try and fix any mistakes as you go along. Of course, if you're doing this to something that's been really perfectly painted with transitions beforehand, you're going to hate yourself if you make big mistakes, because it's much harder to fix them, especially later on when the whole area is covered in this filigree, because you can't do long smooth strokes with a brush, because they'll obviously go over the work that you've already done. So that's why I didn't want to have really smooth transitions on the cloak. I wasted time doing that thing. That's why I'm going to be glazing on top of it after this, because that glazing will also help to smooth in the filigree into the cloak and add sort of nice layers and things. If you do want to just paint it straight on top of a perfectly transitioned cloak, you have to be perfect when you paint it, which means that you have to spend even longer and try even harder. So it's just a case of keep building up this detail, and as I said earlier on, try and make sure that it all flows together. The general idea is to start with a seed, if you like, to start with. Pick a starting place. Don't just pick one starting place, pick 2 or 3. So you've got one on the bottom right hand corner of the cloak, one on the bottom left, and then one in the middle, and then work out from those and then blend them all together. If you just start in one corner and go out from the whole thing from that one corner, you're going to start running into issues where the design looks a bit lopsided and not balanced, and you really want it, even though you're not creating a symmetrical piece, to still be balanced with the look of it, like the size and the direction of all the swirls and things like that. So it's probably quite an important tip, that is, to not just work from one area, but work from 2 or 3 different areas and then blend those sections together. Now, one thing you can see here is I'm blending the middle section into the left hand corner, is I'm adding these small marks that join them as well. And I'll also add some small marks as I go along. And these small marks are to increase the detail density, because obviously on a cloak this scale, if this was actually filigree, it would be very, very small. And it's quite hard to paint to the correct scale, so you're just adding these small details to kind of enhance the complexity of the piece while still having the ability to see the large scale details as well, so it all works together. It's really the curves, the curls rather, that make the design piece. So as long as you keep adding in curls every now and then in between all the lines, it'll tend to work as a whole piece. And as I said, those little kind of raindrops at the end of each curl just make it that bit more interesting. And I think here as well, these are some more marks I've put on that actually I don't like. So here you can see I'm going to rub them out again using the Galvaback red. I pause every time I say that because I have to check the pot, because I keep wanting to call it Val Goldback, but there you go. So you can't quite see it here very well, but I'm working on the side edge of that big fold. It's one of the hardest areas to work in. It's a small area anyway, it's a big curve and it curves round in on itself. Fortunately that area is going to be in heavy shadow, so even if I can't get very good lines there, I'm going to be glazing over that with black, so it'll hide all of the mistakes anyway. But it's important to paint the area in because I'm not glazing it down to complete dark black. I still want those marks to be visible, but they'll be much softer and harder to see unless you look really close. And also you can see from this angle that they're painted on, it will be really necessary to glaze over them because they're so bright on that dark area that already has the shadow area mapped out on it. And it's part of that reason as well that I did the quick transitions with the red before I started painting, because it gives you that, you know, just lets you see the areas on the cloak that are going to be in shadow anyway. Right, so what happened there was I cut the video and carried on to cover the rest in filigree. It was just going to be a case of it took me another hour to paint that, and I thought it was going to be a waste of a video. It'd be a 2-hour video with an hour of it just watching me paint swirls over and over, and you've got the general idea. So what's happening here now is, after having painted the filigree, and again you can see now in the bottom right hand corner how I changed the look of it to the original one, so now it looks more in keeping with the whole design. So now we're on to Citadel Abaddon Black, a glaze using the well palette. I'll place it on top of the wet palette. You can see I haven't still used the other colours on the wet palette yet. It's just a case of glazing. I'm using a larger brush. It's a size 2. It's a brush that I'm testing out, so it doesn't have any official name yet. But you know, anything like Winsor & Newton or Rosemary & Co or something like that will be fine. I use a larger brush because it covers the whole area more quickly, and you're more likely to get a smooth layer down. If you use a very small brush to do glazing, then you're going to make lots of marks, and it's more likely that you'll leave lots of marks. So what I'm doing is, all the area was mapped out in shadow with the red before we started, so it's just a case of now going over those areas with the Abaddon Black and shading down all of the heavy gold brown filigree. And as you can see as well, at this stage it's starting to look quite, it works quite well as filigree, I think, on the cloak. I do change this style a little bit, particularly you can see in the bottom left hand corner how it's very vibrant, because I didn't want it to be quite so eye-catching on the model. And to some extent it looks more eye-popping in the video because of how bright it is. I just wanted a different look to this. But if you like this this look already, then don't be afraid to keep it. I just had a different plan in mind for mine. So it's just a case of, as I said, using the Abaddon Black, glazed down. It's about, I would say, roughly 4:1 parts water to paint. and it's usual case with glazing. I've said before, load up the brush, rub it on some kitchen towel till there's not much paint left coming off, and then quickly apply it in smooth strokes onto the model. And then you keep building up as each layer dries, and you get this very nice soft transition. And it also, as you can see, is really ideal for blending in things into shadow. So you can see it quite well now how it's softening that heavy gold brown really quite far down in the shadow areas. One thing you will find after this is all finished, due to all the glazing, the cloak will be a little bit shiny. So what I will do at the end of this painting the whole model is that I'll give it a coat of AK Interactive Ultra Matte through my airbrush, and that'll unify all the surfaces so that some aren't shiny and some aren't, things like that. Unless you purposefully want things to be shiny, it's a good idea just to sort it all out with varnish. It's particularly problematic with the cloak because the shadows become shiny, and you don't really want that because then it draws your eye to them, you lose that depth. So it's just one of those things of doing the style of painting. Sometimes you get really lovely smooth matte coats, sometimes it goes a bit glossy. So there you can just about see the gloss effect I was talking about as I turn it towards the camera. And as I said, that's particularly a problem because that's the darkest area on the model. But anyway, besides that, we're now going on to highlighting the gold. This is more of the fun stuff. Now, obviously, you can't paint this as a three-dimensional piece. You have to be artificial with how the light hits it. I mean, well, you could just highlight every light curve and then that's on the cloak, and then leave every area in shadow, but it won't pop in the same way. Here you can see, I've mentioned this before, that the Masterson's palette, the paint dries out a bit quicker using the paper that comes with it. Now, it's still been quite a long time. It's over an hour at least that it's been there, and it's still usable, but I just wanted the paint to a better consistency. So what I actually made a mistake here, painting these highlights on. If you look at the left corner of the cloak that I painted, you can see there's some dark and light all in the same area to help that contrast to make things pop out. And I actually used Rhinox hide, but I didn't use it for the rest of the cloak, and it's not really necessary because, as I said, I'm still going to glaze over all of these areas, so it's all going to be toned down. But yeah, if you want that effect in the bottom left-hand corner, use Rhinox hide glazes to kind of soften the darker areas, because otherwise your darkest area on the filigree that you've made using the heavy gold brown is going to be heavy gold brown colour, which doesn't give you that much contrast, and it makes it look very bright, as you can see there, especially because the bottom right hand corner of the cloak is darker than the bottom left hand corner. Now the idea is for these highlight points is not to go over the whole line, it's to pick small areas and do a small section of that area. If you try and keep them consistent within an area, I know that it sounds a bit weird, but if you see like, so I'm highlighting the center of each curl with that little raindrop point, then if you highlight the curl above that and the curl underneath it, it creates a consistent light line. Now, ideally, you would do that as a whole line going through the whole design in that area, but as I said, if you just do that, it makes the highlight area quite small, and you only get a small area of gold popping out. Now there I made a terrible mess with the paintbrush. But again, I'm going to use the Galval back red to tidy it up. So this part here is obviously on a bright curve of the cloak, so this in theory should be a lot brighter than anywhere else on the cloak. Now one thing that I'm doing here is I'm highlighting some marks there. You can barely see them on the video. They're there. I can see them with my eyes in real life. But the problem is, because I highlighted that shade side, because I shaded the shade side so much with the Abaddon black, by using ice yellow straight on top of that, it creates a cold highlight because you don't have too much of the heavy gold brown warmth in there. So you have to be a little bit careful with these highlights. Don't do them in the dark areas too much because they'll look odd, just quite jarring in comparison to the highlights on the warm areas. As is the case with all of these videos, every time you see the camera shake, it's because I've headbutted it. It is a fine balance between putting enough highlights down to make it look interesting and not putting too many down so it completely wipes out that shine effect and just makes everything look the same. At this stage, again, at any stage, it's up to you. If it's your model, you can paint it how you like, but it's fine to stop at this stage if you like it, because obviously the extreme contrast goes pretty much, well, there's no white on it yet, but it's almost from black to white with the tonal contrast. But I find it a little bit garish at this stage, and that's why I'm going to glaze over it, and you'll see how that softens it right down as we go on. So now I'm using the Ceramite White. This does the final little bling on the highlights. But what you'll find is at this stage, when you add this, it really makes it stand out to an almost painful degree. just going and picking out a few of these details a bit more so they are just a bit more visible. Right, now it's time to soften all of these bright filigree designs down. So it's a glaze of Evil Sunz Scarlet. You can see it on the well there, on the top right hand corner. What you're going to find is this will make the whole area look red. It'll also make the filigree look a little bit red, but that doesn't matter too much. It's still warm, it stands out quite a long way from the dark area, and this just pulls it all together that bit. And also at the end I'll have a quick glaze of Yriel Yellow, and that will bring out the highlights again while just strengthening the red. So obviously you'll find that glazing over colours, it affects certain colours differently to others. Having a glaze of yellow over a red just makes it kind of a stronger, warmer red, but putting the yellow over the, which what generally looks sort of pinky filigree after all these red glazes, brings it back to an orangey colour. But what this also does, besides making the design more subtle, toning it all down, is it helps to blend the highlights closer together as well, because some of them were very stark, and now they all look much softer because of blending over the top. It also makes the brush marks look thinner, because it's in a way shrinking them down along the edges. Excuse me, it's my stomach rumbling. I'm a bit hungry. So here I'm using Ushabti Bone. Now this is going to be another highlight colour, very similar to Ice Yellow, just to pick out some of the details again. It's not as yellow as ice yellow, clues in the name, but when I did the yellow glaze on top, it'll make it warm as well. But the Ushabti Bone isn't quite a stronger colour, so it's not going to be make such harsh marks as the ice yellow does when I apply it. Hopefully you'll see that in a moment. So you're just going over the same marks that you made with the ice yellow, but because the red has toned everything down, these marks have to be much finer, because if you do them the same size, they'll obviously be garish again. But also, if you just keep them that bit smaller, they make it look more shiny. And the reason for that is the tonal contrast between the high Ushabti Bone and the dark black. But because the red has worked and toned everything else down, there's a much larger range of dark area on the cloak compared to the light. Apologies for my head intruding on the screen, but as I mentioned at the beginning, I find I like to be very close for the fine detail work, and it's hard to get close without the camera picking it up. But if you go and compare this shot now to how all the lines looked at the beginning of the video when I started this area, you will see there's a vast difference between how thick and bright everything looked. So it's just continuing all these highlight points. And it should be fairly easy. You've already got the highlight points down that you painted in beforehand. So it's just picking them out again, just being careful. I think that's the only large mark that I did using the Ushabti Bone. It was on that middle fold there, just to kind of emphasize that it's an area that's really catching the light. So you can see now, although it's still quite shiny because of the Ushabti Bone, it's much less garish, just a bit more subtle. So that's about it for what you're going to see me painting on the video. I forgot to record the bit where I put the yellow glaze on, but so here you can see it after the yellow glaze, and then I used a couple of dots of Ceramite White on top, and obviously that yellow glaze just on the lighter red areas, not all over the model, but it just added that bit of warmth to the filigree. And there's a final photo where you can see the finished thing without such a bright light straight on top, so you can see more of the subtleties. Hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching.